Good evening, and welcome to Skep Talk, the monthly speaker series hosted by the Bay Area Skeptics. Before tonight's presentation, a few words about Bay Area Skeptics. As North America's oldest skeptical organization, we are dedicated to promoting critical thinking, logic, and rational thought. In the 1970s and 80s, scientists such as Carl Sagan and magicians such as James Randi established the scientific skepticism movement out of concern about the popular fondness for pseudoscience and the lack of public science literacy. Scientific skepticism embraces evidence-based civil discourse on health, education, consumer protection, and especially the investigation of extraordinary claims. Using the scientific method, we hope to promote skeptical inquiry to reduce irrational thinking in society. This talk is supported by Bay Area Skeptics members such as you. Please visit us at baskeptics.org or join us on Facebook, Twitter, and Meetup. Consider supporting us through convenient monthly donations via Patreon. Patrons receive premiums such as discounts and free t-shirts for our annual Skeptical Conference. But more importantly, members help us make the world just a little more reasonable and rational. And now, tonight's speaker.
Good evening. I'm Eugenie Scott, board member of the Bay Area Skeptics. Probably all skeptics are alarmed at the number of enthusiasms expressed by the MAHA, Make America Healthy Again, movement inspired by Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the head of the Department of Health and Human Services. MAHA influencers have been especially hard on glyphosate, the active ingredient in the pesticide Roundup, and have lobbied Secretary Kennedy to ban or strongly restrict this chemical in the interests of human health and environmental well-being. Skeptics and scientists in general are also concerned about the integrity of science. When evidence is presented of scientists, fortunately a small number, being willing to shade their conclusions to suit corporate needs. Imagine then when a respected toxicology journal withdrew from publication what is probably the most cited study used to support the claim that glyphosate does not cause cancer. It is reminiscent of the withdrawal of Andrew Wakefield's 1998 paper on vaccine causing autism. Why was this influential paper withdrawn? And what does its withdrawal tell us about how science does or does not work when there is a financial stake to the outcome? And for a topic as important to human and environmental health as toxicology, how has this situation affected the regulatory environment? These are important questions, and our speaker tonight has a great deal of expertise in this subject area. Dr. Alexander Sasha Karoff has a PhD in physics from the University of Chicago and postdoced at the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton. He has worked at Harvard at the Department of the History of Science with Naomi Oreskes, whose well-known book, Merchants of Doubt, deals specifically with other examples of the compromising of science by corporate interests. He currently is earning a second PhD at the School of Science and Society at Victoria University of Wellington, studying public trust and perception of science. I particularly want to call your attention to a website he has developed with Naomi, reckoningscience.org, the essays on which I think you will find very thoughtful. So here, all the way from New Zealand, welcome, Sasha, to Bay Area Skeptics.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. I'm so glad you are here. So you've been involved in some very interesting research, which I assume you're going to tell us about tonight.
Yes, of course. I will start with broader picture, and then you will find out what was my part in all of that.
Exactly. And I'm a bit familiar with this, but I think we'll just move directly to your talk. Oftentimes the guest and I will chat a little bit, but frankly, I am so interested in hearing what you have to say tonight that I think we'll just dispense with the niceties, if you don't mind, and just move right on. Sasha,
Let's do it.
tell us what you're going to tell us.
Right. Numerology of toxicology, and I hope by the end of the talk you will understand why I call it numerology. But for now, it's a little bit uncertain for you why I call it this way. So my name is Sasha. I'm PhD in astrophysics. So it might seem that I'm not qualified to talk about this topic, and probably I'm not. But there are certain aspects of science integrity that I will be talking about that I stand behind. So I'm affiliated with the following organizations. I'm not representing their opinions on anything. The work you will see is done in collaboration with Naomi Oreskes from Harvard, with Jason McLean from the University of Chicago, and with Ekaterina Kramsova from Blue Marble Space. And everything you will hear today is written in form of essays on our website. So if you want to find a link or specific reference or something, you go on our website and you'll find all of the information there, because I might speak during this talk or something like that. So check out our website. Great. So you will get 3 chapters in my talk. First, we'll talk about glyphosate, then we'll talk about New Zealand, and then we have a mystery topic. So I will start with glyphosate. Story actually starts before glyphosate with Agent Orange. So Agent Orange was used in Vietnam. Millions of gallons of it was dumped. It was a mixture of 2 chemicals, 1-to-1. It was sprayed. People who operated with it wore no protective gear. So this is just some footage from that time. Dioxin that was in these chemicals still persists in Vietnam, and the effects are still present. It's present in the form of burst effects. It's in exposed Vietnamese population. If you are not familiar with that, go on YouTube, find documentary about it, like even from recent years, and you will see still how it affects the society there. And the causation is still contested by US authorities. So go figure. But you can research this topic yourself. Why I'm mentioning all of that is because Monsanto was one of the companies that was producing one of the components for Agent Orange. And as war ended, you need to use your capacities to produce something. So Monsanto in 1971 has a patent on glyphosate. The trademark name is Roundup. Roundup is a mixture of glyphosate, usually glyphosate, and usually some other chemical. So it's sold as Roundup from 1974. It's marketed that it breaks down naturally, and probably it was an improvement over existing pesticides. It's not actually probably. It is, I think, is an improvement. And here I'm not comparing glyphosate with Agent Orange. It's like different chemicals that work in different way. I'm mentioning Agent Orange because it's the same company. So now we have glyphosate and Roundup introduced to American market. So given the history, I think, and in general, when you introduce something new, you want to prove that it's safe. And regulators want from you some proofs of safety. And from the beginning, it didn't go very smooth. So there was IBT, Industrial Biotest Laboratories in the United States, one of the largest US toxicology labs. So they were faking data, essentially. They were logging dead animals as alive, etc. And FDA later called it the most massive scientific fraud. And this laboratory was running glyphosate's early Roundup toxicology tests. EPA later voided the studies. There was another lab involved that was also faking studies. So again, long story, hard to tell it in one slide. Many other sources where you can learn about it. Even one of the Monsanto toxicologists was convicted in this fraud trial. So it was a big deal at some point. And this is where the first studies came from about safety of Roundup. But those were voided. So fast forward, more studies are produced. This is one of the studies. On the left, you see the screenshot from the study. What the studies are about, like how they usually look like. You have a dose, parts per millions. you have, in this particular one, 4 groups of mice. You have a control group with 0, then you have increasing dose. In each group, you have like 50 mice in this particular experiment. And then at the end of the study, it's usually about 2 years, you harvest those animals. By harvesting, we mean killing them and analyzing their organs. And you count tumors. And if you see something like this, that tumors are growing, the number of tumors are growing with the dose, you can interpret it as an evidence of cancerogenicity. Why it's interesting, this particular study, is that if you look here, it goes like 0013, you might think it's like growing. But what happened in this case is that Monsanto argued, like someone from Monsanto argued, that this 0 should be 1 because there was a hired person who analyzed those materials, the data, and found the tumor. Other scientists couldn't see the tumor, but that one could see a tumor. And if you change it to 1, then this trend is not significant. So EPA initially put glyphosate into group C, oncogenic, and then it walked it back from C to D and to E. And the study wasn't checkable. It's not that you could go somewhere online. I mean, at that time you couldn't go online, but it's not that you could go somewhere and check it by yourself. So often the studies are treated as trade secrets. No one can get them, like EPA can get them, but they're not publicly accessible. It's not a scientific paper that you can read in a journal. Well, so that's just one of many episodes of this questionable science and how it was manufactured at those times. At the same time, a little bit later, we have GMOs introduced. So DNA altered via genetic engineering tools, you move a gene in, often from another species. And in this particular case, Roundup ready crops, they carry a bacterial gene that glyphosate cannot switch off, so that plant becomes immune to glyphosate. And the first GM food crop that was approved by FDA was in 1994. The idea is simple. If you have some crop that's resistant to glyphosate, while glyphosate can kill all other foliage, then you can spray the field, all of the weeds will die, but your crops that you like will not die. So it's obvious. And at this point, it might seem like I'm trying to frame this company as something like in bad light, but in a sense, it's like a miracle. DNA was discovered like 40 years before that or something like that. And in that time, you can, from discovery of DNA, you can get to GMO and commercialize it. It's like a scientific miracle that humanity could go through this whole path so quickly. So in a sense, it's an amazing story. So from technology and science perspective, it's just mind-blowing. Anyway. So what happens next? So I tried to insert a little bit positive in the last 30 seconds. But now we go back to reality, what was happening. So these are figures that show how Roundup was growing, the use of Roundup was growing. So we can see here that the pounds applied are going up. And it jumped by factor 15 from 96 to 2016. So it's really growing, billions of kilograms applied. And also at the same time, like what started to be a little bit worrying is that the number of spread-resistant weeds was also growing at the same time. So nature was doing its work, and plants were essentially selected, weeds were selected to be resistant. Another innovation that Monsanto did is subscription seed model. And by subscription, I'm jokingly call it subscription. Farmers cannot plant their own seeds. They have to purchase them from Monsanto, so Monsanto can control the full supply of herbicides and seeds. Again, there is a lot of written on this topic, whether it's good or bad practice, but to me, it's again like innovation on their side, like subscription model. Now everything is is a subscription. You want to watch a movie, you need to buy a subscription. So that's another innovation right there. They continue produce studies on safety of glyphosate. Again, those are very expensive studies. In today's dollars, like if you want to run a study today, it would be around $5 million. So it's not that a small academic laboratory can afford that. That's a lot of money. And it takes time and commitment, etc. So those are usually contracted, these producers of glyphosate and other chemicals as well. They hire other companies to conduct studies for them. They get reports, they get data, and then they create these review studies when they, again, hire some people who come in as independent consultants. At least they want to be seen as independent. They analyze these studies, and again, they do not show anyone raw data. They show you a review paper like this one, written in 2000. So it was published in year 2000. It's called Safety Evaluation and Risk Assessment of Herbicide Roundup and its Active Ingredient Glyphosate for Humans. All of the people we see here, they're affiliated with New York Medical College, University in Netherlands, and Cantox. It's a consulting company in Canada. They do not declare affiliations with Monsanto because they don't work there. So this is reviews that they have produced. It ends, the abstract ends with this sentence. It was concluded that under present and expected conditions of use, Roundup herbicide doesn't pose a health risk to humans. Well, so we should remember that paper from 2000. Fast forward, again, 13 years into the future, Roundup is used in new ways. So it's pre-harvest spraying, not a farmer at all, so I might not explain it very well. But when you collect crops, it's convenient for you for them to be dried out. And often it's difficult because you need to time it with weather, and you can have a rain and it will screw up all of your plans, how to collect it. So it's convenient to spray a herbicide on your crops. So everything will die out, and then you collect them dried out, and it's efficient. So they start to spray glyphosate that way. And EPA at this time in 2013 increases the tolerance on amount of glyphosate in oats from 0.1 to 30 parts per million, like 300 times increase, no new science is produced. So it's just EPA suddenly makes this, increases its thresholds. It's important also to say what's happening is that glyphosate doesn't equal Roundup. Roundup is a formulation of glyphosate, usually glyphosate. Sometimes there is not even glyphosate, as I understand, but usually glyphosate plus something. And together they work as an effective herbicide. If you spill glyphosate alone, it will not be nearly effective. So it's a mixture. And the problem is that this mixture, these additional components, can be 1,000 times more toxic than glyphosate itself. And then you have a combinatoric problem. If you produce like 20 different mixtures of Roundup, it's impossible to test them all because there is infinite number of permutation of chemicals that you can put in. So at the end, you can test only glyphosate. And even testing glyphosate is so problematic, as I have shown you. There are so many strange episodes in this, in testing of glyphosate. So it's just another layer of complexity that imposed on top of it that makes it very hard to assess toxicity of this product. 2015, and the World Health Organization's International Agency for Research on Cancer, IARC, classifies glyphosate as probably cancerogenic. It looks at animal evidence and also relies on studies that show elevated non-Hodgkin's lymphoma among farmers. So it's a big deal in 2015. in the United States, regulation doesn't change after that. It remains the same, but what happens in the United States is there is a litigation where farmers allege that they got cancer because of use of Monsanto products. This litigation ends in an interesting way because the documents that were produced during the discovery process, they became public. So the judge decided to make them public. So now anyone can go online and read internal Monsanto emails related to glyphosate. Not all of them, it's just a selection that became public during the litigation. And it's an interesting read. A couple of things that you can learn there. Like, there are many episodes and there are books written about it. Again, I'm picking some episodes from this big long story. So, for example, one of the experts from Monsanto was sidelined. So they hire an expert, James Perry. It's outside genotoxicity expert. He looks at data, he looks at what they have, and his verdict is that glyphosate is capable of producing genotoxicity by a mechanism based upon the production of oxidative damage. And he asks for more studies. He gets rejected. And then asks for like samples. He's not given samples. And like in the emails that Monsanto employees like write to each other, some of them says, for example, that data generated by academics has always been a major concern for us in defense of our products. So when they get an expert and that expert doesn't produce what they want, they usually they don't publish those results. So they decide what they want to publish, what they don't want to publish. So in this particular case, we learn about it from these internal documents. It wasn't published. Another thing that revealed in those emails is ghostwriting, the practice of ghostwriting. So ghostwriting in our culture seems to be completely fine, that you publish a book with your name on it, even though that book was written by someone else. Like, it's normalized in fiction and in other different forms of writing, but in science, it's a big no-no. Like, you shouldn't do it. There are a lot of agencies and organizations that provide like ethical guidance on how to conduct science. Pretty much unanimously, everyone thinks that you shouldn't do ghostwriting with academic publishing and with science in general. Yet in the emails, we see not just one email is an example. There are many emails in which they discuss how they will write these papers, those review papers that I mentioned. So it's just one of the emails they write. An option would be to add Grime and Kiro Kirkland to have their names on the publication, but we would be keeping the cost down by us doing the writing, and they would just edit and sign their names, so to speak. Recalls that is how we handled Williams, Gross, and Monroe. And this is a paper that I have mentioned earlier, like 2000 paper, again, a review paper. In other emails, you can see how they're shopping for a journal where they will publish this paper. So it was a commitment on their side to produce this favorable review paper. What I want to mention here about ghostwriting, since RFK Jr. was mentioned in the introduction, at that time, RFK Jr. like openly says that it's awful, that ghostwriting shouldn't happen, and it's such a big issue. Like, he calls it ghostwriting, like he uses this language. I didn't insert it in the slide, but it was a moment of unity, in a sense, maybe the last one, where Fox News, PBS, BBC, like everyone was writing about ghostwriting, and everyone was angry about it, equally angry. So at that point, this issue united everyone. Well, after that, Bayer buys Monsanto and inherits liability and litigation. So after this point, instead of Monsanto, we use word Bayer. And Bayer is much bigger company, pharmaceutical company, I think is a proper way to call it. And they have a lot of products. If you go and look at your products that you have at home, very likely a lot of them are produced by Bayer. So it's omniscient. in terms of their products, omnipresent in terms of their products. Also, at the same time, different studies look at presence of glyphosate everywhere, and it is everywhere. You sample any oats, any Cheerios, like whatever people consume, buy in a grocery store, and it appears pretty much everywhere. So exposure is universal. So that's what that's the difference between glyphosate and some other chemical, that at the end you don't have a choice whether you expose yourself to glyphosate or not. It's at this point it's in so many products that you inevitably will consume some, unless you go like full organic, living on organic farm by yourself, etc. So Bayer's settlement budget is around $10+ billion, because Bayer lost, Monsanto lost, and then there were more litigations. Again, I'm compressing the story as much as I can. So it's billions of dollars Bayer have to pay out. No US regulatory change. Europe is stricter, but much of the world is not. So this is, it happened in 2017, like this revelation of ghostwriting, etc. So now we fast forward to 2025, like 8 years since those revelations. So here is my part, like that's where I come into the picture. I didn't know the word glyphosate before 2025. So we write a paper, The Afterlife of a Ghost-Written Paper, How Corporate Authorship Shaped 2 Decades of Glyphosate Safety Discourse. It's by me and Naomi Oreskes. As I said, I'm an astrophysicist. I was completely ignorant of all of these things. I just lived a happy life consuming stuff from the store. And we wrote this paper trying to study whether these ghost-written papers are actually important. Because an argument can be, oh, well, they wrote something in 2000, who cares? Well, it's not the case, as we present in this paper. It's extremely prevalent in academic literature. So it's in top 0.1% in terms of citations among papers about glyphosate. And the number of citations to this paper is growing rapidly, so this line, and nothing happened after 2017. It's not that people saw in 2017, oh no, this is a questionable paper, let's skip it. It didn't happen. People still cited it after that. And this blue line is papers that were citing this study without any caveats, just saying, you see, like, this is a paper. And the red line are papers that were citing it, acknowledging that there might be some problems with it. So you see that most people cite it without any caveat. If you'll see how it's used in governmental documents, it's also cited mostly without any caveats all around the world. So this is Canadian Forestry Service, frequently asked questions. I will read it out loud. It's like one of the questions. Someone asks this Forest Service. I have read on the internet that glyphosate causes cancer and is an endocrine disruptor. Is it true? The answer is no. Independent scientific review panels conclude that glyphosate is non-cancerogenic. They cite this review, 24 is this 2000 review, and say such reviews conducted by highly qualified professional toxicologists and risk assessment specialists provide the most credible and reliable source of information. So that's how governments communicate with their people. And finally, on Wikipedia, this particular review, so again, we looked at only at one paper. There are many questionable papers across many chemicals, so we looked only at one. So on Wikipedia, this particular review was widely used across multiple herbicide articles as evidence of safety. On Wikipedia, you can see all of the versions of the paper and how it was changed. So you can roll back in time and look at it. And it's a very interesting data set. So you can see attempts to add context about the corporate authorship behind this paper and how those attempts were consistently removed. And it was called neutrality. So Wikipedia editors were arguing, again, it's my interpretation, is that peer review takes the precedent. Since it was peer reviewed in a scientific journal, like it's the truth, it's as true as it can be. And litigations, etc., is like less credible sources. So you can take this argument, but still. And as we know, AI models are trained heavily on Wikipedia, are trained heavily on scientific articles, etc. So all of this bias is ingested into AI models and now spit back to people who use chats, etc. Well, so that's what we published. And then we emailed the editor of the journal, asked, like, why don't you retract it? And to our surprise, the paper gets retracted. Like, literally, it was an email on our site. I mean, we wrote a paper and we argued that, you see, it's like, it's important. What we told the editor is that evidence is available from 2017. We do not have any new evidence. So we do not add to that at all. We only argue that it is an important paper. So maybe like attention should be paid to it. And it gets retracted at the end of November 2025. The current editor of the journal cites different reasons, including that it being ghostwritten, but also arguing that it was an incomplete review in itself. So it's 8 years after everyone knew about that, including RFK Jr. So it's just miraculously no one cares for 8 years. So it gets retracted. A retraction is one of the common, not very common, I would say, but one of the processes that academic literature can clean itself up a little bit. A paper can be retracted back. Sometimes it works well, sometimes it doesn't work, but that's a process of academic publishing. So this one got retracted. Surprisingly, the same week it gets retracted, current administration allows Bayer to go to Supreme Court on a very specific topic of whether on labeling of all of these pesticides. Again, too many details. I cannot go into them in a couple of minutes I have, but it's just a coincidence that these two things happen. Again, we asked for retraction in summer 2025. It happened in November. We had no instruments whatsoever to influence anyone. But it goes to Washington. We get invited to write amicus brief. Is when you write something to Supreme Court and hope that someone will read it. We haven't been paid for that, so I did it with Naomi Reskes. We didn't get paid for that. The only thing I got out of it is that it was filed on April 1st, so at least it made me smile for a little bit. But we got attention to because of it from like major outlets, and at the same time we were researching other papers produced by Monsanto, and there are two more papers that have problems in it, that have problems in them, and often problems are more complicated than just ghostwriting. You need to go into details and see how represent the studies that they review, and sometimes there are issues in that. And Jason McLean has a paper on viral speculation, where in some of the reviews, they claim viral infection of mice and discredit that review, even though there is no evidence of that. So if they don't like a certain study, they try to find a way to discredit it in a throwaway. Anyway, so there are a lot of written about it. I welcome you to explore it if you're interested. And as it stands right now, one paper got retracted, and two other papers are currently under investigation by the publisher. At this point, not only we who are asking for retractions, there are other people who joined us and also ask for retractions. So we will see what will happen with these two papers in the future. But it's a huge win for shareholders, because in that Supreme Court case, Monsanto versus Bernal, it was a 7-2 win for Bayer. And when it happened on June, like stocks went up and a huge window of shareholders. Again, I'm trying to insert something optimistic about it, that someone benefited from all of that. And maybe a lot of people who are listening also have their savings and retirements in stocks, and probably you have a little bit of bear in them. So people got something out of it. And that's the end of the story in the United States at this point. It's not clear where it will all go. So I was giving this talk in New Zealand. And for New Zealand, I assembled like a New Zealand version of it. And at first I thought that I will not present it here because I thought that I will be less interested in New Zealand. But then I thought, actually, you have to listen to what is happening in New Zealand, because there are a lot of small countries that do not have capacity to generate their own science. It's just financially impossible. As I said, like one study is 5 million. You have a bunch of chemical. You need many studies per chemical. It's just not possible. So they have to rely on other regulatory agencies worldwide. So now we go to New Zealand. Like it's a second chapter, short one about New Zealand. So the story in New Zealand actually starts also with Agent Orange, because there was a plant in New Zealand that was making one of the components for Agent Orange, and allegedly New Zealand shipped this to the United States when United States was running out of this chemical during Vietnam War. Allegedly New Zealand helped the United States, but it's denied. There are investigative journalists who go after the story. So again, look elsewhere, but there is probably something in it. New Zealand have, and many other countries have to do something about their regulation. They need to come up with a number, like what is safe. And in case of New Zealand, it's hard to tell like which exactly study underpins New Zealand, but I think it's this one based on the number. So this particular study is, again, 1981. So we are relying on all science produced so long time ago. Anyway, so it's a 2-year rat feeding study. Again, it was unpublished and confidential. When it was published, it was confidential. When it was created, it was confidential. And they come up with a dose of no effect, like 31 milligram per kilogram per day, like how much you can give to a mouse. It anchors New Zealand safe intake. In this study, there were some tumors, but they were set aside as not treatment related. Again, you see tumors, but then you argue them away. Well, so what do? They take this number 31 and they divide it by 100. So for rat, 31 is safe. They divide it by 100. They get 0.3 milligram per kilogram per day. You might ask, like, where this 100 comes from? And this is Chekhov's gun. It will appear later. So New Zealand still has this guidance of around 0.3 across the board. And it have it for many, many, many years. And then we go to IARC. IARC, as I mentioned, European agency rates is probably cancerogenic. New Zealand EPA feels compelled to react on that, and they hire a commission. They hire a person to conduct a report, to conduct an investigation and produce a report on whether it's cancerogenic or not. So that person generates a report, and conclusion of that report are here. So the overall conclusion is that based on weight of evidence approach, taking into account the quality and reliability of the available data, glyphosate is unlikely to be genotoxic or cancerogenic to humans and doesn't require classification under HSNO as a cancerogen or mutagen. Well, how come it's possible that in New Zealand, someone comes to a conclusion opposite to IR conclusion, and this is like one person, and on that side it's like a huge agency with many people. So how could it happen? And you look at that review that person produced, and it refers to these 3 papers, among other papers. Those are not the only papers, but to these 3 papers. This one is retracted, and this one and these 2 under investigation. These are exactly papers that I talked about in the previous chapter of this talk. Well, New Zealand scientists at the time, they tried to rebut it. They produced their own report. these New Zealand scientists were connected with IARC. So in a sense, like knowledge exists in New Zealand about glyphosate. Like very good knowledge, like professionals exist in New Zealand. New Zealand is a very special country. New Zealand is a very special country because it has a lot of academics per capita, compared to many other countries that have 5 million people. So resources are there, but still somehow miraculously the person is found who produces a report that relies on this, among other papers, on these 3 problematic ones. And again, at that time, and it's 2016, so it's 1 year before it was revealed that it's just super bad. So you can justify it that they didn't know somehow. And then even the same study, when it's reviewed by more independent people and by Monsanto hired people, they are able to come to different conclusions. So some of those studies were since be uncovered. So some people have access to them. And when they analyze them, it's just selections from different analysis. So one analysis that is more independent sees tumors and says that it's like high significance of tumors in study G. It's whatever, like they just labeled it G. And in this Monsanto-sponsored review, they do not see any problems. They just see glyphosate wasn't considered cancerogenic. So same study, same data, different conclusions. Well, in New Zealand, a non-profit environmental law initiative tries to make EPA, New Zealand EPA, to reassess glyphosate. EPA says there are no grounds do not exist for reassessment. And it relies on this report from 2016 that was produced by one person. And that's where we are in New Zealand right now. Just shows how vulnerable a country like New Zealand is to this kind of science. Well, this is the end of chapter on New Zealand. And finally, I will try to go quickly through the last chapter about factor of 100. So over here, I said that there is a Chekhov's gun. Like somehow you make an experiment on rats, you get a number, then you divide it by 100, you get a number for people. Like how come? Like where this 100 comes from? So we ask this question. And the story behind it is the following. So since World War II, we have tens of thousands of chemicals introduced everywhere. Also, after World War II, you cannot dose people and make experiments on people. So you have to do safety tests on some animals, and rodents are the cheapest ones. So at the end of the day, most of the chemicals are never seriously tested. So there is a convention. Let's take animal limit, usually it's a rodent, and divide it by 100 to get human limit. Well, where the 100 comes from? So you have to really dig to find this paper where it comes from. And it comes from a memo of 2 people from FDA, memo called 100 Food Margin of Safety. It's 3 pages, it has no references, and it argues that animal no-dose effect should be divided by 100 to give a human limit. And it justifies it by 2 things. First 10 comes from species difference. So humans are different from animals, so there is your first factor of 10. And then some people are sick, some people are healthy, they argue. So between a healthy person and a sick person, you have factor of 10 of sensitivity to chemicals. So that's why 10 by 10 is 100. And the first 10 that rests on 2 chemicals, like how do they know the difference between humans and animals? So they do it based on arsenic and fluorine in this paper, just 2 chemicals. So what they write there is that man begins to show intolerance to arsenic at 30 parts per million. The dog tolerates 127 parts per million. And their conclusion is that the man is 10 times as sensitive to poison as a rat and 4 times as a dog. I forgot to insert it here. Anyway, so that's their argumentation. Again, no references. So we don't really know where these numbers come from. But if you dig out, you can find out where it comes from. So for example, 127 parts per million for dogs is a paper from 38 by FDA. It's chronic study on dogs. So just give dogs arsenic until they feel bad, increase the dose. And 30 parts per million for humans is from a different story at all. It's a completely different story. It's Solomon's manual on use of different substances for medicinal purposes. And they talk about therapeutic arsenic. For asthma, psoriasis, and syphilis, this arsenic was used for curing those diseases. And the way it was used is that you increase every day the dose of arsenic to a human. And when they develop some side effects like swollen face, you stop, you wait for a person to recover, and then you give them arsenic again. And you can ask, like, how it helps someone with syphilis. I don't know. Like, again, not qualified to talk about it, but that's what's written in the book. And 30 parts per million is the dose when people get a swollen face. Anyway, so that just shows you like where data comes from. Since then, we know that arsenic is much more dangerous. There are so many situations where people were by accident exposed to high dosage of arsenic and were developing cancer like 30, 50 years into the future. So just giving someone arsenic and see when their face is swollen is the wrong method to see how toxic is arsenic. Well, I will skip the details. Another chemical that they use is fluoride. And it's a whole conspiracy theory story about how water in the United States got fluoride in it. But the short story is that if you don't put any fluoride, people have cavities. You don't want people to have cavities. You find out that if you put some fluoride, you have less cavities. But if you get too much fluoride, you get fluorosis. And there is a window of positive effect of fluoride on people. And it just happened to be around 1 part per million. And if you give rats, it will be 10 parts per million, like when they start to develop problems with their teeth. And ratio is around 10. So that's where the number 10 comes from. Of course, since then, there is different evidence showing that fluoride affects not only teeth, but also causes IQ to go down. There is moderate confidence that it can lower IQ at the doses similar to what people get in water. And people acknowledge from the beginning that depending on your diet, depending on how you cook, the amount of fluoride you consume from water can be very different. So there is a huge variability in consumption. Again, no one cared about it. Everyone used factor of 10. And then between individuals, so sick and not sick individual. Some people tried to challenge this number. For example, this is just one paper where they argue that maybe this should be changed to 42. And I included here because I thought that people in this audience might enjoy it number 42, like when it appears in some papers. So some people argue maybe it should be increased for 42 because it accounts better for 99 variability between people. But the problem is much deeper because we are just different. Depending on what genes you can have different reactions to different food. For example, fava beans for some people can be fine. For others, it can trigger acute like problems with their health. And I mean, it's obvious. We all know about that. Also, we have women among us. And women also react differently on drugs. So someone says like, woman is not a small man. Yeah, so women react differently. So many examples of how women react differently. Maybe the most famous one is thalidomide, is something that if you consume as a non-pregnant person, whether a man or a woman, you're fine. It just helps you with dizziness, I believe. But if you're pregnant and take it, then you increase chances of your children to be born with deformities. I don't know how to pronounce it properly, but with problems. Again, go online and look it up. Also, bodies carry mixtures. Like if you decide something about one chemical, if you combine chemicals, the effect can be multiplicative. And the beauty of this thing is that the guy who first realized it, that there is the effect of potentiation. Like when you have two chemicals, they can react in your body and cause a bigger effect, is co-authored by the same guy who introduced the factor of 10. So it's like same people who did both, introduced arbitrary factor, and then actually discovered that it just cannot work. Well, but it's still divided by 100. Like 100 is a prevalent number. It appears in all of the regulations, in US EPA, in European, in this paper from 2000 that I talked about. They also use 100. Like it's still everywhere. The research that it was founded on, like with arsenic, it's also interesting stories that how do we even know the number for dogs and arsenic? Like why did people check arsenic for dogs? It's because arsenic was used as insecticide, and FDA decided to check whether it's dangerous for humans. So they started to experiment on dogs, and then someone who was producing apples contacted their senator and said that it would be nice to close funding for that study. And senator was successful in closing the funding for that study. So in that 1938 paper, they write that funding was removed. They had to kill all of the animals, and they were able to salvage some of the data. And from that data, they got a number. So, even in that number from 1938 is already like influence of industry on conducting these studies by FDA. Well, in 1980, for some reason, FDA has this oral history project when they interview their people who work for FDA, and they ask them different questions. So in 1980, they asked people working in FDA where this 100 is coming from. And the one person said that 100 seemed so extravagant, you couldn't be wrong by worse than that. Like it's the opinion of one person. Another person said, we maybe got the figure first, then just justified it secondly. And the last, like this person also said, but I think it's currently gospel in toxicology that that 100 figure is just like reading straight out of the scriptures. So it's like full acknowledgement by these people that is completely arbitrary, yet we still use it. Well, it's my last slide. So the question is there a way forward? So this number of 100 is historically contingent, it's never derived, questioned back then, but now it's everywhere. The moral of the story that I tried to convey, like in my third part, is that you cannot convert animal to human. It's like it's wishful thinking to believe that you can use a factor to convert one into another. And this factor of 100 is just, again, it's surface level analysis of what's happening in toxicology. In our research, we're trying to go deeper, look into methods, how it all came around. 100 is just a nice story to tell. And if you found my talks not depressing enough, you can subscribe to our newsletter / research blog on reckoningscience.org, and there you will get more of that. So thank you for your attention, and probably we will have questions now.
Thank you very much, Sasha. That was great. Boy, now I understand more fully the title of your paper. The last section really tied it all together. But the whole notion of animal studies to determine toxicity and cancer susceptibility and so forth. I mean, we don't want to practice on people, so we do use animal models, but animal models are not entirely reliable, as you've shown and other people have shown as well. But the whole idea that you can get some kind of a magic number from manipulating animal study results versus human study results, even when it's the same chemical, whether it's fluoride or whether it's arsenic or whatever, is just nuts. I mean, and
Yes.
I was quite shocked at the data that you presented. I'm aware that mice are not a perfect model for human cancers, certainly, but like I say, we got to use something, and would you say, I mean, is the thinking of people who do research in this area that if you can show it in mice, if you can show carcinogenicity in mice or some other negative effect of a chemical, that should be sufficient for us to be cautious about that chemical? Because in one, I had a friend, a very dear friend, who was a biochemist, and he used to say with a very straight face, if you've seen one eukaryote, you've seen them all. And which of course is that's an exaggeration, and it's not necessarily true that if you've seen one mammal, you've seen them all either. But mammals do have similarities, obviously, and you can learn something from rat or other mammal studies. But would you say that one should at least use caution and have a presumption of caution if you have shown tumors in mammalian?
It should be enough at that point, because all of these chemicals, they seep to our environment, and you have these mammals in the environment, and you don't want to poison probably some animals in your environment. So I think that's enough not to use them, or at least be cautious. Like one can cook up an argument that we are so dependent on these chemicals that we cannot live without them. Like you can try to argue that, but I think evidence shows that for most of these chemicals, you have to be cautious. Regarding arsenic, the interesting biological thing about arsenic is that I believe rats react to it very differently because their blood cells bind with arsenic and they accumulate arsenic for much longer than mice and humans. So mouse and a human are more similar in the way they go with arsenic than a mouse and a rat, which is counterintuitive.
Interesting. Yeah.
But just like between species, like it can be unpredictable. And we learned about it, I believe, in 2007 or something like this. So relatively recently compared to for how long we use arsenic.
And we're in a way, we do have studies, not really studies, but we do have human exposure with something like glyphosate or other chemicals that are used in agriculture or industry. And that's the people who are applying them. In the case of the agricultural chemicals, pesticides and herbicides, the farm workers. And I know there are studies. In fact, we tried to get a speaker who had done research on a topic like that for Skeptical this last year. I know there are studies on farm workers and on their children and the birth abnormalities and neurological effects of being exposed to high amounts. That's very different from saying, oh well, if you have a pear or an orange and it's been sprayed by a pesticide in the field and you wash it really well, or you're not going to get sick from eating that fruit. It's different if you're out there spraying the chemical, if you're out there kind of without, and this happens in many cases, without the proper protection. And then you bring those chemicals home, and children are much more susceptible than adults in terms of their neurology. So, I'm not sure there's a question in here, Sasha, but it's a thought that came up that, many people will say, well, we don't have to worry about something like glyphosate because it doesn't it doesn't persist in the foods that we eat or whatever the thing. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be concerned about its human effects, because there are people who are exposed to a lot of it out in the fields,
Yeah,
and
but it's found in
they
foods.
need to be
It is
protected.
found in foods. So you can find it in food that is sold. And there are people who buy stuff off the shelves and they test it and they see that there is glyphosate in it. So it's so present. So you get a small amount of it. You can argue you get so little of it. But like these experiments with mice, a couple of hundred of rodents in the experiment, and then somehow you extrapolate it not only to humans by a factor of 100, you extrapolate it to billions of humans. So your statistical power in your experiment is like a couple of hundred of rodents. But if you transfer it to billions of people, you will have outliers. Like some people will be much more sensitive to these chemicals, and we don't know who,
Yeah.
we don't know where, and we just gamble. We just choose that we will take this risk that some of us will die.
This is a problem. Yeah, I mean, everything is risk, isn't it? I mean, everything is cost benefit. And I've heard people make the argument that if you're not using glyphosate, you might be using something worse that hasn't been studied as well as glyphosate.
And I will give you an opposite example on that. Maybe by allowing glyphosate, you stop innovation. Maybe if we would be more harsh on glyphosate, maybe we would have robots with lasers shooting weeds, or we wouldn't discover. I mean, it's not a joke. Like people do it seriously. You can maybe there will be another chemical discovered. The incentive of a company is to keep doing whatever they are doing. Like they don't want. There is no reason for them innovate when they don't have a competition and blah 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 blah. So maybe if we would be more harsh with regulation, we would get better products at the end. Like why not? Why not this?
It's true. Good point. You know, there's more ways of getting rid of weeds, just to take weeds and pesticides aside. There are more. You can also get rid of weeds mechanically, hence your robots. I mean, whatever. I think I could chat with you like this for a while, but I know that there are people who are interested in asking questions, so we should give them a chance, certainly.
Sure.
May we have the first question, please? The first question is from Jay Diamond, and he asks, are you saying that glyphosate at the tested dosages is dangerous, or that it's unclear if it's dangerous?
I would say, I mean, the statement that I think I have been making is that science was muddied to the point around glyphosate that if you go standard route of trying to figure out truthfulness of a statement about glyphosate based on published literature on glyphosate, you will find contradictions. It will look unclear. So it will be manufactured doubt. And that's what's partially what is Naomi Oreskes' book is about, that science in this field was like shaped in such a way that it seems unclear. If I'm not a toxicologist to have my own toxicological opinion on glyphosate, so I'm trying not to do that. But for me, I'm deciding, like I want to decide for myself whether glyphosate is dangerous or not, like what kind of heuristics I'm using. I can share those heuristics. And for me, I'm just looking for people, laboratories that have a reputation, in my opinion, and that I trust that they have done their work properly, analyzing data, conducting experiments, etc. And those people recently, for example, there was a Seattle glyphosate symposium, and in 2026, it can be Googled easily. And there is a consensus statement there that talks about glyphosate. And ensure the conclusion that, yes, it has these dangers of cancerogenicity and other effects. And I think, in my opinion, there is enough evidence for us to strictly regulate it in the United States. and then in New Zealand and in other places. Well, I mean, that's the answer.
Regulated more than it is currently done, is what you're saying. I mean,
yes, and again, it's very peculiar because there are so many applications of glyphosate, the ways you can use it. In New Zealand, what people don't do in the United States, I think, but in New Zealand there are invasive species, and people can like targeted spray those invasive species with glyphosate, and then you can argue that maybe it's positive good, but it's very hard to quantify whether it's a good or bad at the end. So anyway, I'm just saying that it's complicated. This cost-benefit analysis is not trivial at all.
I agree. May we have the next question, please? And this is a question from Benjamin Gunnell. Logically, how can it be a human carcinogen, given that the mode of action is being a systemic herbicide for broadleaf plants? Are the batches contaminated?
The problem is that trace amount of glyphosate stay in food because it's sprayed on harvest, for example, when they try to harvest, they spray it for crops to dry out. Some of it gets on food and it packaged, it's processed into like cereal or something. It gets sold on the shelves and there are trace amount of glyphosate in it. So if you consume this stuff daily, then you're daily exposed to small amounts of glyphosate throughout your life. And what is the effect of that? You cannot conduct an experiment on humans to know exactly.
We don't know. I guess we don't know about the cumulative effect.
Yes, we don't know. We don't know. How can we know about cumulative effect on people? You need to take a person, put them into cage, and wait for 80 years for them to like live their whole life.
Yeah. Wait a minute. More than 80 years, please. Some of us are sensitive about that. Okay. I'm not making light of the issue that you were talking about. I'm making light of myself. So your answer to that question was that, yes, it is a systemic product that is taken up by plants, but then we eat those plants and we accumulate small amounts, and we don't know for sure if over time the accumulation is dangerous or what, but we carry it around with us, whether we want to or not.
Whether we accumulate or not, like in what parts of our body we accumulate it or not, is like one question. And another question is just we are exposed to it daily. Like you just exposed all the time.
May we have another question, please? And this is from Jay Diamond again. IARC classifies agents based on the strength of evidence that they can cause cancer, not the level of risk at typical exposure levels. Is that a rational thing to reference, or is it causing confusion?
So the question is why IARC and, for example, US EPA sort of have access to the same data, but come to different conclusions. Well, their process is different. IARC relies more on public data. It takes into account who produced the data. So it's like how they weight the evidence, or like strength of evidence is different for them. So the question is not the level of risk at typical exposure level. Strength of evidence, not the risk at typical exposure levels. So I'm not sure I completely understand the question, or maybe I'm not completely understand how IARC classifies it. But yeah, so ultimately, what do you want to get with these chemicals? You want to, if you're producer or a regulator, you want to have a number. How much of it in whatever, in water, in products is okay. Like you're aiming for some threshold because it's easy to regulate, it's easy to comply with that regulation. And it derived from these experiments, these numbers usually. But whether it's and side effects, you can have a huge range of side effects. And cancerogenicity is just one of them. And this agency evaluates specifically cancer. It's a cancer. I forgot what it stands for, but it's World Health Organization that looks at cancer. And so again, maybe I don't understand fully the question. So I'm saying things, but I don't think they land as an answer.
I'm not completely sure either. Jay Diamond, you can take another crack at it if you want.
Okay,
you control the con, as it were. Someone with an unpronounceable name, which is mostly numbers and letters, says, why didn't you mention that further research on IARC by Reuters showing that the IARC document underwent significant editing? I don't quite understand what that is either.
There are so many things I'm not mentioning. Why didn't you mention search IRC by?
There's
you see,
an additional.
I don't like this stuff. At least give me a link what you're talking about. Like that's do I know everything about IRC? No, I don't know everything about IRC. Like if it's specific, then we get a link, we look at the article, we talk about it. Just throwing this question like that, it's an attempt to like undermine. Okay, there is more to it. Okay, I just see what's on the screen. Which a negative conclusion about glyphosate. A negative conclusion about glyphosate leading to tumors. Again, I cannot comment on something without a link and without spending time on that. It's just, yes, there are so many things I'm not mentioning. I'm not mentioning that there was a person at US EPA who was saying to Monsanto that they should get a medal if they kill a certain assessment of glyphosate. I'm not mentioning that AOC recently got documents, like through FOIA requests, got documents, and it shows that Bayer will meet with head of EPA in the United States and provide them like a gift or thank you. Like they provide the thank you for updating glyphosate website. Like the amount of corruption, like at this point in the United States, it's so obvious, it's so transparent that, I don't know what to mention. To tell a full story about if we want to wait every episode, if we want to talk about every episode, we can do that. Then it's not a talk like that. You want to go to a symposium and spend time on it, because trying to do this back and forth in the format of a conversation on YouTube, on television, whatever, is just intellectually dishonest.
I don't think I agree with you. I mean, you cannot have a conversation. You can't answer his question in the way that because you cannot hold a conversation. It's understandable.
Just to add to it, I post something on glyphosate, like people come up like and they throw out like a couple of sentences of opinion. You go on Reddit, on any of these websites, like everything glyphosate, a lot of people with names that you cannot pronounce, surprisingly, throw out opinions. Not substantiated with anything, just something, like some episodes that they know. You go on Wikipedia and you look how it was edited, as I mentioned. Wikipedia is great because you can see all of that. You can trace down
very valuable.
Every comment. And you see how people get frustrated when people want to add the context to all of these episodes, and some anonymous editor deletes it a couple of hours later, as if they online all the time just for this purpose.
Yeah, I think it's important not to lose track. I mean, you covered a lot of topics in your talk, and I think it's important as a takeaway that we appreciate how much was learned from the discovery documents from those lawsuits, because we got information, not we, and not I personally, but the science community and the community as large got information from Monsanto, from emails among executives and among the science staff and so forth, revealing the fact that this study, which was, what was it? You calculated was 0.1% of
Yeah.
the highest frequency
Yeah.
citation. The document that virtually everybody depends upon to support this idea that glyphosate does not cause cancer. This is a very, very flawed document, which was not just ghost written by Monsanto executives, but the data is very, very flawed. And there's a very good reason why this document, why this research paper or review paper was withdrawn, because it was very shoddy work. And yet, it was depended upon to such a huge degree by such a large number of researchers who just, cited it. And I think this is something that the science community really does need to deal with. And we have to deal with the problem of peer review. We have to deal with the problem of integrity in science, and the fact that Monsanto scientists ended up doing a great deal of the writing of this, and apparently other papers as well, is very shocking, because lives depend on it. It's a very important issue, and I think you and the work of other people at Harvard, of your rescues, and I find your website to be extremely useful, and I'm glad that you're doing it, and keep on blogging. Well, I'm afraid we're running out of time, my friend, and we have pretty much finished off the questions that came from the audience. I do want to thank you very much for spending this time with us, and all the way from New Zealand. We had a couple of little glitches in the video, but by and large, your voice came through. We understood your talk. I think the system works. At least digital communications between Berkeley, Toronto, and New Zealand are remarkably sound. So good for us. We did it. I'm going to ask everybody else to stay a little bit longer. Thank you again, Sasha, and good luck with your work.
Thank you for listening. And
but everybody else wait, because I need to tell you about next month's talk. Our August speaker, which will be on August 13, will be a Bay Area skeptic's favorite astronomer, Andrew Fracknoy. Andy was one of the founders of the Bay Area Skeptics, which, interestingly enough, I learned when I was doing research for the paper that I gave at SciCon earlier this month, back in 1982. He's going to be talking about, in his title, I quote, UFOs and life out there. Some skepticism, some optimism. And if you've ever heard Andy speak before, you will definitely want to hear him speak again. 7:30 next month, August 13. See you here. And thanks for coming tonight.